Understanding Antifa, History, Ideology, and Modern Reality. Introduction. You can be completely anti-fascist, opposed to authoritarianism and political violence without supporting Antifa. Anti-fascism itself is a moral stance, something shared by people across the political spectrum, liberals, conservatives, centrists, and social democrats alike. But Antifa, with a capital A, is something very different. It's a specific current of militant activism that grew out of communist and anarchist traditions and that replaces persuasion with confrontation. Conflating the two doesn't clarify the debate, it destroys it.
Get the fuck up!
Fear is a part of our tactics. It's our job to go out there and say, no, we're not going to allow you to spread these ideas.
Make it clear! Fascists are not welcome here! Make it clear! Fascists are not welcome here! Make it clear!
Weimar roots Antifa's lineage begins in the final years of Germany's Weimar Republic. In 1932, the Communist Party of Germany launched Antifascistische Action, the first organized Antifa. It was meant to unite left-wing factions under communist control as a red united front. Their circular logo, two red flags, represented socialism and communism. Decades later, one flag turned black to symbolize anarchism, reflecting the later merger of communist and anarchist thought. Even from its birth, Antifa was not a nonpartisan opposition to tyranny. It was an extension of far-left revolutionary politics. Post-war Europe and the Autonomen after World War II, new radical groups revived Antifa's imagery and methods. In West Germany and Italy, the Autonomen and Autonomia movements rejected capitalism, the state, and electoral politics altogether. They occupied buildings, fought police, and developed what became known as the Black Bloc tactic, dressing entirely in black to conceal identity and act as a single anonymous force. Their banners often bore a phrase that captured their approach: Antifa heißt Angriff. Antifa means attack. For them, confrontation wasn't a last resort. It was the core of the ideology. North American lineages. By the late 1980s, Antifa's militant culture crossed the Atlantic. In the United States and Canada, anti-racist action grew out of the punk and skinhead scenes, organizing to counter violent neo-Nazis. ARA used decentralized cells, doxing, and street clashes, echoing their European predecessors. From those networks came the Torch Network, and from Torch the modern U.S. Antifa scene, still decentralized, still militant, and still bound together by ideology rather than membership roles. The ideology, more than just against fascism. Antifa is not simply against fascism. It is openly anti-capitalist and deeply rooted in anarchism and communism. Its adherents reject liberal democracy as too compromised to stop oppression. They argue that capitalism itself breeds fascism and therefore must be dismantled. That's why Antifa imagery almost always combines the colors red and black. Red for socialism, black for anarchism. Calling oneself Antifa signals allegiance to that revolutionary worldview, not merely opposition to authoritarianism.
There is no one organization called the Black Bloc. It's dozens, hundreds, thousands of autonomous organizations all across the country and all across the world. Black Bloc or bloc is just what we wear. It's entirely black, simple, non-identifying clothing.
Doing something illegal, if you're trying to punch a Nazi, then you don't want police to be able to identify you, and you don't want police to be able to tell you apart.
Antifa really exploded into the headlines in response to the disruption of the Milo Yiannopoulos event back at UC Berkeley in February, where masked Antifa broke windows and created enough of a disruption for the university to cancel the event. This created a lot of debates around different tactics for opposing the far right and questions around free speech.
They coordinate locally, use encrypted messaging, and publish guides through anarchist platforms such as It's Going Down, or regional collectives like Rose City Antifa. Their actions range from online research and doxing to street mobilization and physical confrontation. This decentralized structure makes Antifa nearly impossible to ban, but also impossible to hold accountable, a hallmark of the leaderless resistance model that extremists of every type have adopted.
One common tactic that you'll see being used is we will have people who are actually at home that are coordinating with the action, and they'll be checking Twitter and whatever other news sources that they can find in order to be communicating information to us via encrypted messaging.
It's important that we don't give the state a monopoly on violence.
Antifa and violence. While most demonstrations remain non-lethal, Antifa's tactical philosophy accepts property destruction and assault as legitimate political tools. Supporters describe such acts as direct action, an immediate response when institutions are deemed corrupt or complicit. That's why riots in cities such as Portland and Seattle featured the same black bloc methods: masked uniformity, coordinated movement, and attacks on property or police lines. These aren't random outbursts. They're consistent with decades of far-left revolutionary doctrine. The idea is to make opponents, and sometimes the public itself, afraid to resist.
So if that means occasionally being violent against the people perpetrating violence, I accept that.
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Richard Spencer, who coined the term alt-right and whose website publishes articles calling for genocide after an Antifa protester punched him in the face, there's videos of him talking about how he's afraid to go out and they might need to get security and they don't know if they can afford it, and how if they can't have a public movement, they can't win.
We need to take very seriously the notion that anti-fascists aren't just going to scream at us, they're going to physically attack us.
And that's the point. If we go out and punch Nazis in the face, they won't appear in public, and like they themselves admit, they can't win.
Punch a Nazi in the face!
Why decentralization still matters. Decentralization doesn't make a network harmless. Ideology combined with autonomy can produce sustained violence without central command. White power movements such as the Hammerskins and neo-fascist accelerationist groups like Atomwaffen Division use the same approach. Small cells united by a common worldview. Antifa mirrors that structure on the opposite end of the spectrum. Same mechanics, different flag. The problem of redefinition. In recent years, especially after political leaders condemned Antifa, many commentators have tried to redefine the word to mean simply anyone who opposes fascism. But that is a category mistake, replacing a concrete ideology with a moral abstraction. Antifa's own history, symbols, and literature show that it is not a loose expression of goodness. It is a revolutionary project rooted in anarcho-communism. Pretending otherwise hides its true nature and erases the violence that has always accompanied it.
It was covering another Antifa protest turned riot. At that point had been routine in Portland. And then I was ambushed in a mob beating. And I had never been in a fight. I didn't even realize that I was being assaulted until seconds in. And the punches came from everywhere on my head and my face, and I was bleeding out of my eyes and ears. And then they threw all the drinks in my eyes to humiliate me further and to laugh at me. And I was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance and CT scan, and I had subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is bleeding in the brain. I nearly died. And after surviving that, the reporting that I saw in liberal media it seemed to suggest that I had deserved it because they branded me far right. And some even went so far as to suggest that I maybe faked my injuries. A BuzzFeed reporter asked for my medical records, which I did provide, but this felt so, it's like because I didn't die in that attack, there was another round of people who wanted to finish me off.
Almost all people agree with violence at some point. Why do you support the violence of American soldiers and American police and not the violence of American citizens?
The rhetoric of fear. From its earliest days, Antifa has used fear intentionally, fear as deterrence and fear as persuasion. When movements teach that fear and violence are acceptable tools of justice, they create a culture where dehumanization becomes virtue. Once opponents are defined as fascists, any act becomes permissible. That same rhetoric, when aimed indiscriminately, branding whole political groups as Nazis or enemies of humanity, inevitably inspires real violence by those who believe they are acting righteously. History shows how easily ideological moralizing becomes justification for bloodshed. Conclusion: you can and should oppose fascism. That's a moral imperative, but it's entirely possible and often necessary to reject Antifa at the same time. Antifa is not simply anti-fascist. It is a militant anarcho-communist current that embraces confrontation, decentralization, and fear as instruments of change. Being anti-fascist means standing for liberty and reason. Being Antifa means embracing an ideology that destroys both.